next speaker is Dusty Hoffman. He's a stream habitat specialist for Minnesota DNR. He previously worked in the Driftless program at Trout Unlimited as the Southeast Minnesota restoration specialist. He's going to be speaking with us today about trout stream habitat improvements in Southeast Minnesota.
I am very happy to be able to share the progress that TU has been making in Southeast Minnesota's Driftless area over the last 2 years. It was a pleasure to work with TU, and to be able to continue to work with TU in the future here will be a lot of fun. Before I move on from this intro slide, I just want to point out the difference in the soil types back here where my cursor is on the back of the bend. We have the pre-settlement soil and then the post-settlement soil up top. But also looking at this slump right here, we can tell that this slump has not been around all that long because there's still grass on there. High water events would have probably washed away that topsoil otherwise with the grass. So just an overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give you a snippet of the projects, the habitat improvement projects from 2020 to 2022, give you a glimpse at the 2023 projects, discuss the invasive vegetation removal projects that Trout Unlimited is doing in Southeast Minnesota, and talk about maintenance that has occurred on some of the project sites. The habitat improvement project goals and objectives are to reconnect the floodplain. A lot of these projects are where there's a lot of bank lowering and channel narrowing to reduce sediment and also to help transport that sediment along. It's also to improve the habitat diversity, making sure that we have a good number of riffles and pools, and putting in some overhead structures like wood and rock, maintaining good vegetation within the corridor, removing invasives and promoting native vegetation, and having a focus on fish and aquatic invertebrates, but also keying in on non-game species like birds, bats, reptiles, amphibians, and terrestrial insects. But we're also keeping the angler and great opportunities for the angler as one of the goals. This map shows all the locations where habitat improvement projects were completed in the 2-year span in red, and also where the invasive vegetation removal projects occurred in Southeast Minnesota over the last couple of years. And this figure just kind of discusses the mileage that was achieved over the last couple of years. 22.6 miles of habitat improvement. 8.3 of that was actual in-stream habitat improvement projects. And if people want to get this, we can find a way to share that through Sarah. So the projects that took place in 2020 did include some partners aside from Trout Unlimited. NRCS partnered in a couple projects with the DNR and TU, but most of the funding was through the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment. So the 3 projects that we'll focus on were the South Branch, Wiseau Creek, West Indian Creek, and you can see the lengths of all those right there. I'm just gonna kind of give you guys some highlight pictures of before and after on these projects. The South Branch of the Whitewater River, this is just downstream of Crystal Springs Hatchery. You can see on the left photo that there's a lot of cobble getting washed into the stream. Part of this project was to stabilize the dry run and narrow this channel so that we could pass sediment. And you can clearly see the difference between the left and right picture, that there's been quite a bit of narrowing, and you can see that there's a reduction in sand as you're looking at the bed of each of those photos. This photo will give you a little bit better perspective. I kind of circled that USGS monitoring station so you could have a reference that this is the same location. And you can see on the left photo that there's a lot of sand And on the right photo with those riffle installations and the channel narrowing, there's been a great ability to pass that sediment through and improve habitat for invertebrates. On Weisel Creek, there was a really like sharp bend that just kept eating away with 6-foot high banks. And one of the features of this project was to install a toewood bend. So the center picture shows the toewood poking out of the bank with rock on top and soil on top of that. And you can see on the right photo, the aftermath, we do have a bunch of watercress growing on top of the little root wad ends that are poking out. On West Indian Creek, a great highlight was reconnecting 700 feet of channel that was blown out when a beaver dam caused a cut through. And on the left photo, you can see the actual head cut right where that cut through occurred, where you see it almost like a waterfall. And on the right photo, you can see the blue line representing the reconnected channel, which is about 700 feet. And where that log is located in that right photo is the approximate location of the cut through that you can see in the photo on the top center. In 2021, there were 3 projects that took place, and NRCS also teamed up with Trout Unlimited and the DNR. We had West Indian Creek, Rush Creek, and Weisel Creek. At West Indian Creek, this was a continuation of the year before, so this was almost a 2-mile project. You can see a comparison here of all of the trees that were once there are kind of stacked in the left photo, and you can see that the banks are a lot higher, 6 to 8 foot banks through that whole section. And on the right photo, you can see a year later how the vegetation is coming in, and you can see the taper down to the stream edge. And on Rush Creek, this is the photo from the original introduction slide. You can see on the left, and then on the right, that's the same location, but all of that soil being moved back to the bluff toe. And this feature is actually, it's meant to serve as a purpose for nesting birds like swallows and kingfishers. And within 1 year of that soil being stockpiled back there, there was actually use by swallows. At Rush Creek, there was a lot of interaction with the local Trout Unlimited chapters, the Windcrest chapter, the Hiawatha chapter, and the Twin Cities chapter all sent volunteers down to build lunker structures. And many of those volunteers actually saw lunkers installed for the first time on that project site. At Weisel Creek, we did a lot of excavation from the floodplain, and the photo on the right actually shows a gigantic mound. I wish that I had a picture of somebody up on top of that, but that represents about 260 dump truck loads. The contractor actually surveyed that entire pile to come up with those numbers. Some of the other practices that are going into these habitat improvement projects focus on the non-game species. So the frogs and the reptiles and even birds that might use the loafing logs as a little perch while they're resting. But the wetland scrape that you see with that log on the top left photo is focusing in on a lot of the amphibians and reptiles. And on the right photo, you can see that was 1 year later, there were that many tadpoles in that water. And on the bottom photo, another area where we stockpiled soil out of the floodplain so the bank nesting birds could have habitat, and that bank was also used within a year. In 2022, there were 2 projects that Trout Unlimited and the DNR teamed up on. on West Beaver Creek and Winnebago Creek. One of the key things at West Beaver Creek was also addressing a dry run where we were seeing a lot of cobble wash into the stream, creating an aggraded riffle, which then led to a multi-channel. And what that was doing was just kind of forcing that water over against the left bank, as you can see in the left photo. And in the right photo, the project about 2 months later, you can see vegetation response coming in very well. You can see that the banks are roughly about 1 foot and 8 inches high for that bank full height, but they're also tapered back pretty well. On Winnebago Creek, you can see on the left photo here where we have a slump that was new the spring that I took this picture, so last spring, and I measured out that slump at about 4 feet wide and 25 foot long. And another picture indicating at the same location that, there wasn't a slump there any longer, but we narrowed that channel considerably. You can see that that channel was actually narrowed about 35 to 40 feet at that location. At this location, we were looking at where the survey crew is in the left photo. We're looking at about a 70-foot wide channel, which was blown out over many years. And in the background, you can see on that left photo, we have 8-foot high banks. In the after photo, you can see on the right side, the circle where the surveyors were, that we still maintained a wetland in the back. And I'll actually show you on this next photo. This is the wetland that was preserved in the right photo. So this is just a different angle of that same vicinity where you can see the surveyor in the center of that 70-foot wide blown out channel. Much of this soil was taken and stockpiled in the back where you can see we were focusing on nesting habitat for bank nesting birds. And then in the foreground, the wetland for reptiles and amphibians. Future project sites that DNR, NRCS, and TU are all gonna target are Mazeppa Creek, Mill Creek, Rice Creek, Cedar Valley Creek, Hay Creek, and Trout Brook. And I'm gonna show you some photos of some rough areas on those project sites that we're trying to address. This is Mazeppa Creek, which is, pretty evident what we're trying to address here, sediment issues. Those are about 27-foot high banks. Mill Creek, a lot of focus on a phased project will reconnect the lower portion of Mill Creek. And I don't remember the length of that, but it's roughly 600 to 700 feet being reconnected. And you can see on the bottom photo where it's just kind of sedimented into that old channel. On Rice Creek, again, taking down the banks and narrowing this channel so we can get sediment transport, but also focusing on the better substrates for fish and invertebrates. Cedar Valley Creek, 7-foot high banks on a really kind of wonky bend here. The pattern just kind of got out of adjustment here. And what we'll do on a spot like this is just try to bring the channel back to where it was, about where the dog is in the right photo. At Hay Creek, we're gonna adjust the pattern a little bit on some bends where we're seeing a lot of erosion and do a little bit of channel narrowing as well. And Trout Brook up by Meesville that's a brook trout focused project. And this project shows an aggraded riffle and a pretty wide channel. You can see that the substrates down in the bottom are pretty sandy looking, even from the photo. And we're going to do a lot of tree removal in this riparian area so we can focus in on native vegetation instead of reed canary grass and box elder. Some of the vegetation removal projects that Minnesota DNR and Trout Unlimited are teaming up on are focused in areas where we know that we're not going to have that project site brought up to the very top of the habitat improvement priority list. So the sites that we're focusing in on have a lot of box elder, buckthorn, honeysuckle, black locust, and species that just don't promote deeply rooted vegetation, native vegetation. So several projects have been done in the last couple years, totaling 14.3 miles of riparian habitat improvement. And these are the locations. Just a few pictures that show a before and after comparison of some of these sites. You can see that we're going from unfishable to a fishable state. And, sites where we're seeing possible blowouts on banks. When we remove a bunch of the logs like you see in this left photo, it will actually, during high water events, we won't have all of that stuff crashing against the banks and tearing them up, bringing in a bunch of sediment and degrading habitat. Another photo on East Indian Creek. And this is a photo taken this winter on one of the sites where we're doing vegetation removal. You can see all the orange X's on these trees. Those are all box elders that are adjacent to the stream that in the summertime are shading out the forest floor. So we're not seeing a lot of good species that will hold soils in place well. We also have been doing a lot of maintenance work and planning other maintenance work on several different stream locations. Just to give you an idea of what some of this maintenance could look like, a lot of this stuff is older work, and you can see from this photo that sometimes muskrats will get into the lunker structures and behind rocks and just kind of create holes that become like kind of a funnel point during high water events, where as the water is lowering, the water can kind of funnel through those holes and just kind of open them up more. But these are some sites where we need to do a little bit of structure stabilizing. And here's a little bit better look at some holes like muskrat damage or high water damage. And then also stabilizing banks. There are plenty of projects that actually focus in on just stabilizing banks on easements that landowners own and sell to the state. But these ones are ones that were on a Trout Unlimited habitat improvement project. And these are all ones that would be addressed during a maintenance scenario. And while we've had folks on site, we're removing down trees that could potentially, wash downstream and get stuck on structures and kind of tear up the habitat improvement project. So I have plenty of time for questions here. And if I stop sharing, I guess Sarah can lead those.
A question from one of our other presenters. It says, one of your photos of proposed habitat projects, I noticed evidence of excessive grazing. Do you work with landowners to reduce grazing where it's causing problems at your project sites?
We're going to start trying to put that as a higher goal of ours. There's a project going on right now on Gorman Creek in Minnesota where we're working with a landowner, and I'm just about to be put in touch with the expert, Dean Thomas, who works for the NRCS office. So we do want to focus on that more. It's really hard to make a landowner do the right thing. And one of the ways that we're trying to incentivize that is by paying for some hay. So Trout Unlimited has been stepping up to the plate to, pay for some hay or pasture rental so we can keep cows off of the field longer and get good vegetation establishment and hopefully that will encourage them long term to maybe do a little bit more rotational grazing.
Yeah, and I guess I'll take a liberty since I'm also with the TU to say we're also looking at whether or not doing rotational grazing plans could help, alleviate some of the limitations that producers may have in considering, leaving an area a little less intensely grazed. Obviously, I think our last speaker really highlighted that there are a lot of different motivations for undertaking a practice, but you have to meet people where they are too. So just thinking about this issue more broadly, when you're incorporating non-game practices into your projects, have you been successful in working with, I guess, state or potentially other nonprofit groups that specialized in non-game species to do additional monitoring or research work associated with that?
Not at this point, but I think having a project in the right area would be key. If we can get some projects on the WMAs and state forest land, I think having a platform like that it would lend itself to an easier long-term monitoring plan. So that's a great idea to keep in the back pocket.
Thank you so much, Dusty.
Thank you all. Have a great day.